Hi, good morning. And what we're going to do today is a 3-frame animation which we will put in the motion of a fish. So I'm starting with Photoshop, and I'm just going to go to Create New, 1080p, and we're going to create a new document. I'm going to go ahead and add to this document right now a new video layer called new blank video layer. And we're going to go ahead and set that frame rate, as we usually do, to 12 frames per second before we start. And I'm going to double click this background just so I can turn it on and off, and it'll help me for drawing. At this point I have one video layer. I'm just going to call this fish outline, and what we're going to be doing is drawing the profile of a fish. So in order to do that, I'm just going to be using this reference here that I got from the internet of a fish. Let's see, I'm just going to drag this into my space here. And that creates a new layer, as you see right here, the image layer. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and I'm going to just get it set up because that'll be the fish that I'll work with. I'm going to hit return because that's about the right size. It is a smart layer, so I'm going to right click on the word, and I'm going to just rasterize that layer or turn it into a normal layer. And I'm going to flip this to the left because I want the fish to be going in the other direction. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and flip across horizontal. Here we go. So this will be the layer I'm going to use to just draw. So I'm going to put it underneath my video layer. Let's go ahead and do that here in the layers palette. I'm going to select my fish outline, use my brush tool, B for brush, make sure that I'm selecting the brush that I want to draw with, D for default colors. So you can see that's going to be black. And then I'm going to lower the opacity on the fish layer just so I don't see it as much. Go back to the fish outline, and I'm going to go ahead and start drawing that fish with the brush, B for brush. So let's go ahead and get started. So, and again, this is just going to be for reference, but I'm kind of like, I like the fact that I have something that's actually a fish. And since this is a quiz, and remember, all these lines are going to have to be drawn 3 times. I keep pushing the button, so that's not good. So I've got my tail going. I'm going to undo that part. Alright, and remember, B for brush. I'm going to be making sure that when I select E for eraser, when I select this, there are no edges where I'm going to accidentally select the inside of the fish. Like this right here would be a problem. So I'm just going to make sure, go around, that this is in fact a nice solid fish. There we go. Nice solid fish layer. There we go. Now we're going to go to the, I don't know how I get these things here. We're going to go to the next layer, or the next frame. So you can kind of see my altered video right here. So if I go to the next frame, I want to be able to see that fish because I don't need the original fish anymore. I want to draw from my drawings. And now I'm going to just use my brush tool and just brush on this new layer with pretty close, but not taking too much time. Previously, and then we're going to do this one more time. Go to the next frame with the arrow tool, and then I'll just start wherever. And again, this is the 3rd frame. The fish will be doing nothing, but the nice part is it'll be doing nothing but feeling more animated, right? And that's the important thing, is like it doesn't feel like something that you just, a drawing that you cut out and used. And then you guys can do the same thing. Okay, Command 0 zeroes out. Now I've got my fish. I'm going to put my loop point. Notice how I always open up the altered video. That's important just so I can see where my frames are, because I want that loop point to be right there. So at this point I've got a fish. It looks like it's alive. I've got, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 drawings. And so what we're going to do now is create a new blank video layer. So layer, video layer, new blank, and we're going to call this one fill. We're going to move it to the front here, and we're just going to call it fish fill. And because it's going to be our layer that we use to fill the fish, we're going to put it under the outline. We're going to use the W2. I'm going to close this up so you don't have to see it anymore, right here. And I'm going to move my playhead back to the first frame. And what I'll do is the W key for wand right here. I'm going to select everything. And if I did it right, it'll select everything but the fish. As you can kind of see, it's kind of selecting the outside here. And then what I'm going to do is invert that selection. Select inverse. Now it's actually selecting the fish. Go to my fish fill layer. Then I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool. I'm going to pick a color that's kind of fishy. I want it to be a little bit light because I'll want to do some shading and drawing or whatever. But for now, I'm going to pick something a little bit like a little blue light like that. And then I'm going to fill in. If you've done this right, all the lines will not be transparent. You see, this is behind the fish. So if I turn the top layer off, this is what we got, which is great because you could use this in lots of different ways. I'm going to go back to my outline layer and do this 2 more times. I'm going to go to the next frame. Just to save myself from like not knowing what I'm doing, I'm turning off the onion skinning so that I can see only the frame. I'm going to go to deselect, select deselect, or Command D, sorry, right there. And I'm going to start over. So wand, W, select the outside. Notice that the fish is selected because I didn't make a mistake. Invert that selection, select inverse, go to the fill layer, and G for bucket tool, and I already had my selected color, and then I'm just going to fill. I'm going to do this one more time. Next frame, outline, W to select. I'm going to go deselect. I'm going to click on the outside of the fish. It does in fact select just, nope, there is an issue. You can kind of see that it's selecting the line here, and here is the issue. So I'm going to go back to my brush tool, deselect, and I'm going to just fill this in with just that. So be very careful when you're creating your outline. So I'm going to go to W, click, and now the fish is selected. Invert the selection, and then go to my fill layer, G, and then fill. Because of that little thing, I would have messed this up, just so you can see. Now, if I wanted to, I could go back and just fill in the, or paint in the eye, B for brush, deselect, and on the fill layer, if I wanted to, I can, I'm going to use the white and make my brush a little bit bigger, and if I want to, I can paint in the eyeball, go to the next frame, paint in the eyeball, paint it if I want to. I can also lock this layer, so if I wanted to, I can X to switch, bring that color that I had back, and then I can actually make it a little bit darker, you can kind of see here. And now if I make my brush really big, I can actually lock the fill layer, like here, and then I can just give this like a little bit of shading here. You can kind of see underneath if I wanted to, and I'll do that on all 3 frames. But you don't have to. This is just me. But you can kind of see when you have your own, your fill layer on a separate layer, you can really dial in, you know, what you want. So you can do some really great things. Make a little mistake here, so I'm just going to fix this. Maybe put some, like, so you could, you know, do what you need. All right, I'm going to save this because it's a quiz, and I want to make sure I don't have to do this again if something bad happens. Fish.Photoshop document. So this is just a Photoshop document. Now I'm going to be exporting this fish with that transparent background. That means I cannot have this background turned on. So I'm going to turn it off. It was only useful for me for a little while. And I'm going to go to File, Export, Render Movie, Render Video. And then I want to do just the work area, and you can see 0 to 2, that's 3 frames. QuickTime is what I want, animation high quality, and here's the important thing, straight unmatte. That means it's going to give me that alpha channel. I'm just going to call this fish movie, and I'm going to put it on the desktop, and I'm going to hit render. Okay, I'm going to save my document here and quit, and now I'm going to go to motion, and because this is a new project, we're going to go ahead and, as soon as motion opens here, new project, we're going to import this fish that we just did, the movie right here, 3 frames as So it's still opening, a little bit of slowness today. I don't know why. There we go. Import as project, because that 3-frame animation is correct as far as shape is concerned. And there's my fish. Import as project. As you can see, the animation's on a black background now, which is great. And if we hit the space bar, you see that's 3 frames. So before we move on, we want to make this project 10 seconds. So I go to Project, Inspector, Properties, and right here, I will make this 10.00 or 10 dot, and then hit the return, watch the line, and notice that it is now bigger. And I'm going to zoom out so you can see how much space we really do have. And I'm going to just open this up. At this point, you can see I've got my fish, and it only holds for 3 frames. So let's go to that fish layer here, go to our timing, open up the end condition and put loop, and then bring it up to 100. Now this is 100, I'm assuming 100 frames at this point, plus 4, because of the 4 that we started with. We want to make it a full 120, so let's go ahead and just type in 120 here and hit return. Let's actually do, yeah, maybe 120. It's usually 120 minus 4, but we can be a little bit over here. And at this point, we now have a fish that's just sitting around doing nothing for 10 seconds. Okay. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of animation to this fish so that we can then export it and bring it back into Photoshop so that we can actually continue drawing on it. So we've got our fish, and it is just sitting there on our screen. What I would like you to do is go to select the fish if you haven't, go to the Properties panel, and notice the Scale tool here. If you open it up, you'll notice that you have 3 sliders, and we showed this in class, and that allows you to stretch or squash the fish in a different orientation. X along the x-axis, left and right, up and down for Y, and Z really doesn't do anything. Go ahead and make that fish 50% and hit return, and that will scale everything at the same rate. So now that fish is a little bit smaller and easier to work with. Notice that the position is 0, 0, 0 on the XYZ axes, so that fish is directly in the middle. And notice that the anchor point for that fish is right in the middle of the fish. If you were to rotate this fish, I'm going to open up the rotate tool so you can see it. And if I were to rotate it in the Z direction, you'll notice that this fish rotates along that axis, or on that anchor point. As we did in the last class, you can always change the anchor point using the anchor point tool right here, and then move that anchor point to a place that makes more sense. So now, if the fish were to swivel or rotate, it would rotate right on the eye. So that might look a little bit more natural, as you can kind of see if it's swimming, it's going to do something like that. So the anchor point is an important tool that I just want you guys to remember where it's located. I'm going to close up that rotation. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and change the position so that the fish is off screen. And so right now I'm just going to hit this reset parameter to put everything back to 0. And I'm going to move the move the X value so that the position of the fish is off screen right here at the beginning of the timeline. Now we're not going to see that fish until we actually add a behavior. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to Behaviors, Basic Motion, and just like last time, we're going to select Throw. And this should open up our Behavior tab here, and you can see our throw velocity now is 0. That means we're not throwing at all. You might also see the HUD, which I just clicked here to open it. You can open it and close it up here. And that also will give you nothing on there's no arrow here. Now if you take the Y and you actually move it to the right, you'll see that throws it up into the air, and you'll see the motion path here on the fish. That's not what we want. We want to move it in the x-axis, but you'll notice that if I move it just to the right, that's throwing at 100 pixels velocity, but it's throwing it to the right, and what we want is the opposite. We want to go the other direction. So to do that, you actually go the other direction on the timeline. You actually go below 100. In fact, we're going to make it 237. So this way, when we hit the spacebar to play our animation, you'll see the fish moving in a straight line from left to right at this speed, negative 237. Now you'll notice it didn't quite make it off screen, so this is the nice part about motion. We can actually just adjust it till everything is just exactly where we want it, and notice how it just made it off screen at that point. So I think we're just going to call it negative 270, just to be negative 270, just to be round, and this way we have something nice. So we have our fish swimming from left to right on a transparent background. What else can we do to this fish? Like we talked about in class, we can go to behaviors, and this time we're going to add a parameter, and this parameter will be called oscillate. This will allow things to go from one point to another, back and forth. But we need to, on oscillate and a lot of these parameter tools, you need to apply it to something. So watch what happens if I click the 2, transform. Now, we know that up and down is the Y value. So if I were to select Y, you instantly see that the fish will actually move up and down. Do you see how that works? So now we have a little bit of movement up and down for the fish, but it seems a little bit too slow. It should be moving up and down a little bit more frequently. So let's click on the oscillate again, and we're looking at this window here. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the throw because we're done with that. Notice that the amplitude is how tall something is, and it stops at 100, but you can go even higher if you wanted to, just like before. But I'm going to actually bring it down a little bit so that the amount that it moves up and down is not so much. So now that's barely moving, but we want actually more to happen. So let's go ahead and increase the speed, and notice now we have a nice wavy line. And so maybe that's too much, but now you see the fish is kind of just moving as if the ocean's kind of bobbing it up and down, which is kind of what we're hoping for. It gives a little bit less just of a straight edge movement here, and so now the fish looks like it's actually kind of doing things. One last thing I'd like to do, let's go ahead and just put playhead wherever. Select our fish again. So maybe add one more behavior, and maybe this time we're going to, what kind of behaviors should we have? Let's see, I'm going to go to the behaviors tab. We're going to duplicate this oscillate. So I'm just going to right click, hit duplicate. Now I've got 2 oscillations happening to the same parameter, but I'm going to change one of the parameters to transform rotate, and what I'm going to rotate on is the Z. We talked about the Z being the point that comes out of the screen. So if I rotate on Z, you'll notice that I'm just going to change the amplitude so you can see what that's actually happening, is that this oscillation that is identical to the other oscillation is now affecting, you can kind of see, it's affecting the rotation value. So we're going to dial this down quite a bit, obviously, so that this fish doesn't go crazy. So I'm going to pull this, I'm going to not change the speed, but notice the amplitude. I'm going to put the amplitude down to almost barely something. Let's try just a number 2 and see how this looks. So you can kind of see that it's bobbing a little bit. I could see even less, so I would actually say 1. And so this gives us a lot more authenticity. Remember, it's rotating around the eye. So it does look like it's swimming up and down, and the back is moving, and then the front is being a little bit more stable, something you would expect in a fish. So just these 3 things, the oscillation, done twice to 2 different parameters, plus the throw, give our fish something, something interesting as far as something to look at here. Now I want you to notice that if I were to modify any of these parameters, these purple lines, this is where it starts. So if I wanted the fish to start, for instance, on screen without moving, I might actually move this throw in here and then take the parameter properties, position parameter, and scooch that fish over back on screen like this. So what happens now is the fish is moving, but it doesn't start to go forward until it hits that throw. So you kind of see that. Now the oscillate and the rotation oscillation and the
other oscillations start here, so which is why we still have that up and down movement. So if I wanted to, I can just move this to the throw beginning point, and I can also move this to this point. So now what we have is a fish that's just waiting there, and then we'll start to move at this point in time. So again, these purple lines have a start and a stop point, which is really nice. And you'll notice that the fish didn't quite make it all the way through that throw here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the throw size, make it a little bit further along here so that it's fully off screen at the end of this animated loop. So you can see it just starts there, moves forward. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to export this whole object, this fish, with the transparency so that I can work on it in Photoshop. Maybe I want to add something like something that happens here to it, but I can't draw in motion. So I'm going to need to export this sequence in Photoshop in order to do something to it. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to go to File, Share, and Export Selection to Movie. And the selection is your timeline range. It should tell you under Settings. It's currently setting the entire timeline because they're both the same, the play range and the entire timeline. In order for this to actually export transparency, you're going to need Apple ProRes 444, right? So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to make sure I save it to my desktop. And I'm going to call this fish start and go. Just so I know that that's a video that I'll be able to do. Now, once it's done, it was very fast. You'll see that you get your video. It's on a black background, but remember, this is just a transparent background, assuming you didn't put a black frame underneath it. And so when I go back to Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and go back to our fish. Here it is. What I'm going to do, just so you can kind of see, because it's hard for you to see a little bit, is I'm going to zoom out here so you can see my entire timeline. I'm going to change the play range, right? Because before we only needed 3 frames. I'm going to turn this fish off because we don't need it for now. And I'm going to go to Layers, Video Layers, and then I'm going to do something new video layer from File. I'm going to select that movie that I just had, and now you'll notice that that is now a 10-second movie that has been brought in. I'm just going to put it above everything else and call it Fish Motion because that's where it came from. Okay, we brought in our fish motion layer just to show you how that would work. And again, you could edit this fish now, and it is a full 10 seconds, 120 frames of animation that we could use. You could duplicate the layers, those kinds of things. Now, we would only bring it back into Photoshop so that we could actually add elements to this fish that are hand-drawn, which is something that we might want to do. But one of the things I definitely want to do is give this little fish a background. And maybe just bringing it in as a reference allows me to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create 3 layers of, maybe even 4 layers of background so that this fish can actually live in an ocean. And I'm going to show you how I do this. So I'm going to leave this fish motion layer on, but I'm going to create 3 normal layers. 1, 2, 3, just using the little plus button by the trash can here. For the first one, I'm going to call this Ocean. And for the next one, I'm going to call it Rocks. And then for the third one, I'm going to call it Seaweed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ocean underneath at the bottom, the rocks in the middle, and then the seaweed on top. And these are just normal layers. So if I actually draw on them, they will actually just be normal layers. Now, I'm going to just expand this so that when I watch this animation, it's going to have these 3 layers on the entire 10 seconds. So I'm expanding these purple layers here. And you know that purple layers were going to be, when I draw on one, it's going to be there the entire time. So I'm going to start with the ocean. I'm going to take my brush tool and default for default settings, make sure it's on my pencil. And what I'm going to do is go to this ocean layer here, which is just a static layer, and I'm just going to create the top for the ocean, right? So I just made this line. Now I'm going to fill all this area up with color, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select the top, and that allows me to select just the top part of the image. As you can kind of see, it's selecting all the top. I'm going to invert that selection, Command I, Shift Command I, and what I'm going to do is make a new fill layer, a new normal fill layer under the ocean layer, fill. And normally what I would do is Command 0 to zoom out. I would just use the bucket tool to paint in a color, right? Like a color, like maybe, what's the ocean color? Maybe blue or something, like a dark blue, like deep, maybe that. And hit OK and just do this, and that would fill that in. Now it's hiding the fish because the fish is under the ocean layer, and that's not a problem. We can always move that to the top if you want to see the fish. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to undo 2 times. I'm not going to use the fill tool for this. I'm going to use the gradient tool. I'm going to go to gradient tool. I'm going to go up here to the selection and the little drop down arrow. I'm going to go to basic, and I'm going to select the first one. Now the first gradient is going to give me a normal gradient that's linear. You can kind of see that here. And it goes from the foreground color to the background color. So I'm going to change the background from white to maybe something a little more teal and darker. And again, this is going to be our gradient. You see it right here when I open it up. I think the foreground color should be a little brighter, so I'm going to just make it a little bit brighter. And that's going to be our gradient. And the way this works is you click, hold, and you drag a line, and it goes from foreground to background. This looks pretty good to me, but if you don't like what you see, you can try it again. And you'll notice that the shorter the line, the shorter the distance between the 2 gradients. The longer the line, the more smooth the gradient is, something like that. So maybe it kind of can go in a slight direction like this. And the reason that this is working is because my fill layer, I'm actually filling in on the actual fish layer. You have to be careful where you do this. Oh, sorry. Here we go. My fill layer is by itself, and so it's not overwriting like my drawing element here. Remember, if I had done this by selecting the drawing element and filling in, you notice how it occludes or destroys that line, so that looks terrible. So again, always make sure you have your fill layer, and then I'm making a gradient. So once you've got your layer that's the fill layer and the ocean layer, you can deselect. And notice now we have a nice drawn like line for the top, and then we have this ocean here. Now these 2 layers go together, and so what I'm going to do to save me time is I'm going to select both of these, select the first one, and then hold the shift key down and select the next one, and I'm going to select Command E to crush those together. And notice the fill layer under here is not big enough, so I'm going to make sure that this fill layer is just as big as all the other layers here so that nothing weird happens. And I'm going to crush these together, so fill and then ocean and Command E. Now what happens is that makes a new static layer that's just both layers together. You see I have the drawing and I have the background. And I'm going to put this at, I'm going to put the fish at the top of this so you can see how this is looking. I'm going to do the same to my rocks. I'm going to create some rocks here so that this is kind of like a horizon line for the fish. And so I'm going to go to my rocks layer, B for brush, D for default colors, black and white, right? And then what I'm going to do is just start with like a little bit of a, this is the background, and then I'm just going to add some rocks and stuff to it, like you can kind of see. And if I need to erase, I'm just going to erase, because this is just a line layer, right? I'm going to make sure that I fill in. This is why it's nice to have the keyboard shortcuts. Make sure I'm not leaving any gaps, because what I want to do is use the fill tool to select just this part. Brush. Okay, and there's that. And there's some other elements here, because this is the bottom of the ocean, right? And so there's like stuff, and maybe there's some things in the back here as well. And I could shade it if I wanted to. You get the idea. It's not that much. But you could spend a little bit of time on this, because this is the background. It's not going to change. The more work you put into it, the more beautiful this setup will be. At this point, I'm pretty happy with what I got. And so what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to turn off this layer so you can see it. I'm going to select the top, W for wand tool, and I'm just going to click here to select this top part, which is everything but the ground. I'm going to make a new layer, call this fill, rocks. And I'm going to put it under, just because that's where it belongs. And now I'm going to fill it with a color. So I'm going to pick a color that's kind of like, this is what I imagine the bottom of the ocean would look like. Maybe something like that. Hit OK. And then make sure I'm on the fill layer because I don't want to mess up my line layer. And then I'm going to use the normal paint bucket tool this time, G for paint bucket. And invert the selection. Now it's everything but the top. And there we go. And you can kind of see a really nice fill for that selection. If I turn on the background, you'll see, I deselect, that this fill layer, you see how this is a separate layer. And the rocks and the fill work together. So let's go ahead and merge these together. Select both, Command E for merge. And now you see I can actually put this layer almost wherever I want as long as it's lower, because as soon as we go higher, we're kind of missing some stuff here, which is always nice. This is why it's always nice to go higher than you need, and then if you need to in motion, bring it down a little bit. Finally, I want to do some seaweed, so that's what my seaweed layer is like. And I'm just going to use the brush tool, B for brush, D for default colors. And then what I'm going to do is just draw some nice seaweed. And remember, this is all going to get filled in, so it'll be kind of, it'll work out. So we'll just kind of do this, maybe something like this. Maybe this is coral and not seaweed, I don't know, right? So we're just kind of, and remember, I'm making sure that I don't leave any gaps. So like for instance, if I zoomed in here, that's a gap, so we definitely don't want that. So otherwise, when I select the everything but this, it'll be a problem. I'm going to put another little coral or whatever you want to call this seaweed thing here so that the fish can swim through it. And again, this is just me just creating some seaweed. And if I make a mistake, I can always zoom in and just get rid of it. And if you're being distracted by the background, just turn them off so that you don't have to see it, right? There we go. Just make sure you're drawing on the right layer. And I just use the eraser tool, the brush tool. And of course you can, you know, eraser tool here, brush tool. And you could, if you wanted to shade it and add some elements, you know, to make it look a little bit more like a authentic drawing, that would also be possible. Notice how this, you can just kind of get rid of the places where they overlap here. Makes it look a little bit more correct. There you go. Remember, you're looking for these little areas. Don't let any openings happen like that. So make sure you block those in. Once you're happy with what you got, I'm going to use the eraser tool, E for eraser, B for brush. Just like this is like this, and maybe this is like this. E for eraser. What we're going to do is we're going to select everything but this, and if we've done everything right, W key, you'll see that the outline is in fact selected, right? Then we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to call it Fill Seaweed. And then we're going to put that under the seaweed layer, the drawing, and then we're going to use a G tool to select the paint bucket. And I'm going to pick a color that I think seaweed is, maybe that. Hit OK. And then notice that if I fill it here, it's like, oop, I forgot to invert it, right? So select inverse, and now that's what we get. And again, if I need to fix the drawing layer, just go to the drawing again, and then I can erase some of the drawing stuff that I didn't want, because now I can see it much better. And so what we've got is this so far, right? We're going to now export this to Motion, and this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to deselect everything, save it, Command S. Now here's the deal, like what we could do is we could take these 3 layers and export them. What I'm going to do is just do the following. I'm going to go to make sure everything is on. Notice that the seaweed layer is still not merged, so I'm going to do that, merge these 2 so they're just one layer. Command E merges. So now This seaweed layer is only this. The rocks layer is only the rocks with the lines, just one layer, not two. And then here's what the fish looks like if we have it in the motion document here. And you can see the fishes in the seaweed layer should be above the fish, but now by putting it above, we have that, right? Okay, let's go ahead and go to Save, File, Save. And this is a Photoshop document, so File, Save, and I just did that. And then I'm going to go to Motion, and I'm going to go to Import. That was loud. And on my desktop is the fish PSD, and I'm going to hit Import, and let's see what happens. Now it knows that there's a bunch of stuff in this document, and what I can do is import all the layers, or just one of the layers, like the rock layer, the ocean layer, the seaweed layer. For now, I'm just going to import all the layers, and then I'm going to delete the ones I don't need. So I'm just going to hit all layers, OK. And notice, I'm going to close this up, we've got a new group right here, but now we have seaweed, we have the fish, we have rocks, ocean, and then we have all these other turned off layers. I only need ocean, rock, and fish, ocean, rock, and seaweed. So I'm going to take the fish layer and hit the delete key. Take this guy, delete, this guy, delete, this guy, delete, and the background, delete. So now we're left with just 3 solid layers. The seaweed, you see it, the rocks, and the ocean. And we had in this motion project our fish, right? So that fish is still there. It's just hidden behind our group, which is our background. So I'm going to go ahead and take those things and arrange them the way that they were in Photoshop. So I'm going to take my seaweed and I'm going to move it above the fish layer, like that. I'm going to take the ocean and put it under the fish layer, like that. And notice that when I do that, it creates its own little group. That's going to be our background. And now you can see the fish, by the way. And then the rocks go in that group, but in front of the ocean layer, so that if these are backwards, you won't see the rocks, right? Which might be what you want. Who knows? Okay, and now what we have, and since this fish layer, this background is no longer the background, but in actuality is a fish plus the seaweed, let's just call it fish. And I'm going to take that seaweed and take it out of the fish layer because it's just confusing. It goes in its own group, and this time I'm going to call this foreground. Yep. And then notice that we've got this fish thing here. This is like some leftover from whatever we had before from this group. This fish here is the actual fish. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Don't need that. So now our fish group, we have a foreground group, right? You can see that's our fish group, which is in the middle, and then our background group, which we can call background. And now if we look at our motion project, we're going to get this. The reason we want to be able to do everything in motion like this is because, and by the way, notice that my this could be higher, so we can move each one of these groups. That's our background group, and I can move the rocks lower if I want. I can move my fish as well, right? That group can move like here, maybe even lower, like that. And then the foreground objects, maybe I want them over here, so it's not occluding anything, right? So this is the nice part about motion is like once these objects are there, you can kind of see maybe that was, you can move them around so that you get them to where you want them to be. And another thing I could do with the seaweed is just duplicate it, Command D, and then move that duplicate like here, maybe make it smaller so that we've got like more of these elements, you know, available. Maybe I'll duplicate it again and put this one over here. And so now we've got a little bit more stuff for the fish to swim through. So we're just using what we've already done to kind of like make this work. And this is what we have so far. So you can kind of see this fish is starting here. And there you go. So there's more you can do. We're going to be doing it in class, but I definitely love the idea of being able to create your foreground, midground, and then background items, and then sandwiching everything in motion so that it's all working together. Hope this helped.